Thank you for auditing Professor Sky's Record Review, where sometimes I talk about new documentaries about musicians. This week I'm going to be reviewing Biggie, I Got a Story to Tell, a documentary about the life of the Notorious B.I.G. And it's funny because it was exactly 1 week ago today that I reviewed a documentary about another Brooklyn artist, 6ix9ine, and I came up with the kind of clickbaity title, Is 6ix9ine really the new Tupac? And I made it kind of clickbaity because obviously they are not the same in terms of their talent or their ability, but my similarity between 6ix9ine and Tupac was mainly on the idea that they came to becoming members of the Bloods, becoming gangbangers, after they attained fame, after they got off the streets, after they became musicians, and that they took on the role of a gangster, like an actor would, and that both of them were able to do that using their natural charisma and their acting ability until the role overtook them, and one of them ended up in jail and the other ended up dead. That was my point there. And I was tempted, I was tempted to sort of have another clickbaity title for this one. Something like 6ix9ine is better than B.I.G. And then in parentheses, or at least his documentary is, right? Because I do think the 6ix9ine documentary is probably better than this Notorious B.I.G. documentary. But at the same time, I don't do negative reviews here. It is worth watching. It is very much, it's on Netflix, if you have Netflix. If not, I don't know, it's worth $10 to rent. When I was thinking about this documentary, I watched it in two different parts. So I was watching it with my wife, who knew nothing about the Notorious B.I.G. She's from another country, she doesn't know much about hip-hop, I'm trying to teach her. So we watched the first half and then the second half. And after the first half, I thought the movie was amazing, great, one of the best music documentaries about a rap artist I've ever seen. Not quite on the same level as the Tupac documentary from like 10 years ago, but still a very good documentary. And then last night after I finished it, I was like, that was garbage. That was one of the worst documentaries I've ever seen. So the conclusion that I've drawn and what I've titled this video is the Biggie documentary is half great. And it's pretty well split between pre-fame and post-fame, that it goes from great to bad. The great things all are in the pre-fame era. Wonderful interviews with his mother about what he was like, interviews with his grandmother, interviews with other family members. They talk about his time in Jamaica. They talk about friends in the neighborhood who helped to inform his musical style. Now, I've never actually read anything about Biggie's early life, so a lot of this was new to me. Like, he had a jazz musician family, like a guy on the street who talked to him about jazz, and they were trying to draw a parallel between his cadence and jazz music, which was pretty well made. Tons of interviews with his corner friends, people who he did crimes with, people who he was just friends with, schoolmates of his. Really great. The highlight of the whole thing is this video that they have of him doing an early freestyle where he went from one part of Brooklyn to another part of Brooklyn and he did a freestyle and just blew everybody away. I love the interviews with Easy Mo Bee, one of his first producers. And the interviews with Puff Daddy about how did he find Notorious B.I.G., how did they get their career started, was just great. This whole early part, I just felt it was so well done, it was so well illustrated, the interviews went along with the story, and there's a whole narrative arc. And then, who stopped you? What happened? I think this movie should have been like 5 hours long, because this beginning was great. But then the second that we get to the time of making Ready to Die, the whole documentary kind of falls apart. There's virtually nothing about the recording of Ready to Die, even less about the recording of Life After Death. The music itself is hardly mentioned at all, where in the beginning we had tons of great examples of him rapping and all of his lyrics popping up on the screen, which is very useful, so my wife could read them and not just have to figure out what he's saying. All of a sudden, it's just breezes through, just acts like the music doesn't matter, like the albums don't matter, no mentions of any of the collaborators. It's very sort of uneven at this point, where it talks about some members of Junior Mafia, but not others. And a perfect example of how this documentary fell apart is an important part of Biggie's rise was when Puffy had to kind of go off on his own when he got fired by Andre Harrell, who was running the record company that Puffy was working for. And when they say that Andre Harrell fired him, I knew what that meant, because I I've read a little bit about that story, but my poor wife, she doesn't know who Andre Harrell is, and the documentary just goes right through it, just blows right past it as though, yeah, it's just, Andre Harrell fired him, and they didn't even really talk about the development of Bad Boy. They didn't really talk about the East-West beef, or they didn't even really get into the Tupac Biggie beef at all. I can't quite tell like why that is. Like they don't go into any detail, any sort of meaningful detail whatsoever. And really just what I wanted was more about his art, because he was a great artist. And they set, this is the thing, they set up with this great interview with the jazz musician and with his earliest producers, like the ones who produced his very first tracks, like when he had to go in and pay for studio time as like a 19-year-old kid or whatever. Like they would talk about what makes him great, and you'd understand it, and you'd be so excited. But then why are we not getting that for the recording of Life After Death? Why are we not getting people breaking down his music later? Why is it just, I mean, his style developed. He got better as he went along. And there's just nothing. And even his death is sort of, it's not explained at all. It's just sort of said that it's happened. A whole bunch of stuff about his funeral. One of the weirdest things is I think there's 2 interviews featured with Notorious B.I.G. on the entire documentary. One of them is a radio interview that is a little bit weird, like it's hard to see, like he's kind of far away. And then the other one is this nice, intimate interview, but it seems like that was all they got. And I can't quite figure out, because they clearly had the permission of the estate, because they didn't say anything really bad about him at all. But then why didn't they get more footage? It is amazing watching the documentary that you get the sense when he's just speaking, like in this interview, that he can barely talk. Like, it's so weird that he has like one of the best flows in rap history, that he's, that has an eloquence and a style that is absolutely unmatched. And yet when he's just talking, it's really hard to understand. I don't know. So I recommend it. Watch the movie, enjoy it. Am I being too hard on it? Please tell me in the comments if you saw it and what you think of it. I was so happy and then so disappointed, but it's still very much worth it. And yes, I think technically, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this, Notorious B.I.G. is a better rapper than 6ix9ine. I'm just gonna say it. So if you wanna hate me, if you wanna unsubscribe to me for making such a radical take, I'll take my mug and all my subscribers, and I'll just disappear off the internet. All right. Well, I'm gonna go prepare for class for Easy Mo B. There's the camera.